Everyone loves to root for the underdog. So today we'll be going through the biggest AFL upset for every year since 2000. Let's get into it. The biggest upset in the year 2000 happened in round 21 between Essendon and the Western Bulldogs, a game more commonly referred to as the Super Flood game. Going into the game, Essendon hadn't lost a single one of their first 20 games and were therefore already guaranteed the minor premiership. The Western Bulldogs were sitting at 11-9 and were hoping to secure a spot in the top 8. The match got its nickname from the Bulldogs coach Terry Wallace's plan, which involved flooding most of his players into Essendon's forward 50 to shut down the Bombers' attack. At some points in the game, there were up to 14 of the Bulldogs' 18 players in Essendon's attacking half. This has gone down in history as one of the greatest upsets of all time. If you're interested in learning more about this game, I would highly recommend checking out Footy A to Z's video on the game. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out.
Sit back, Rowan Smith's come onto the ground, they've done it! They've won it! That gets them in the finals. The Doggies are in the finals, and the great run has come to an end.
The biggest upset in 2001 was between Hawthorn and Fremantle in round 18. Going into the game, Hawthorn were third on the ladder and Freo were dead last, having not won a single game yet. The match saw Freo come back and win by 16 points after trailing by 40 points during the second quarter.
Since round 21 last year. And there it is! The moment to savour for Ben Allen. Might be the only win of his senior AFL coaching career.
The biggest upset in 2002 happened in round 5 between West Coast and Brisbane. Brisbane were the reigning premiers and were on a 20-game winning streak, equalling Essendon's in 2000. West Coast was sitting at 2-2 after round 4 and were 9th on the ladder, so the matchup was quite similar to that in the Super Flood match. The only difference being that West Coast had the home ground advantage. Perhaps the biggest upset of this game was not only did West Coast manage to beat the Lions, but they thrashed them. The full-time score was West Coast 18-13, 121 to Brisbane 10-15, 75.
Well, there it is. John Worsfold has ended Lee Matthews' 20-game winning streak, but more importantly for the Eagles, they've won their third game out of 3 here at Subiaco, and they've defeated the reigning premiers by 46 points in an excellent performance.
The biggest upset during the 2003 AFL season happened in round 11 when St Kilda beat the still reigning premiers Brisbane. Going into the game, Brisbane were top of the ladder and St Kilda were 11th. The Saints were able to hold on to their lead to win the game by 5 points, with the full-time score being St Kilda 13-12, 90 to Brisbane 13-7, 85.
Seconds remaining. No! The siren has sounded before Luke Power has marked no mark. Saints have won an incredible finish to this game. The Saints, with their biggest scout for the season, have won the game as Luke Power, just to make things worse, kicks the goal. It's all over at Telstra.
It's on as well. Ackermanis is in it. St Kilda have won by 5 points and 1 second.
The biggest upset for 2004 was between the Western Bulldogs and St Kilda in round 12. Going into the game, the Bulldogs were second bottom and only had 3 wins for the season. The Saints were top of the ladder and had only lost their first game the week before in round 11. The match saw the Bulldogs beat the Saints by a comfortable 23 points, with the full-time score being 15-13, 103 to 11-14, 80. The biggest upset for 2005 was in round 9, which saw West Coast lose their first game all season to Collingwood, who were bottom of the ladder at the time. The Eagles were 13 points ahead in the final quarter before Collingwood produced a clinical 7-goal quarter, resulting in a 23-point win.
Beaten by the bottom team since round 3 of 1997. It was Collingwood on the wrong end of it that day. They lost to St Kilda by 7 points. But today the Pies can sing it loud and strong at the MCG.
For the biggest upset during 2006, I've given it to both times Carlton played Melbourne for the year. In a season in which Melbourne made the finals and Carlton finished bottom of the ladder, only winning 3 games for the year, Carlton managed to beat Melbourne on both occasions on which they played, by 21 points in round 1 and by 7 points in round 18.
How sweet will this sound be? Kuda will celebrate game number 250 in style.
Jeff White kicks a goal. Do Carlton fans care?
Not at all.
The biggest upset for 2007 happened in round 14 and saw 13th place Brisbane defeat 3rd place West Coast. The same matchup as the biggest upset from 2002, except in 2002 it was Brisbane who were reigning premiers and the favourite, and in 2007 it was West Coast. Round 14 2007 saw Brisbane take down West Coast in Perth by a comfortable 27 points.
For the Brisbane Lions, for the first time in 6 years, they have triumphed against the West Coast Eagles at Subiaco to snap a 7-game losing streak.
For the biggest upset in 2008, I couldn't put anything above the huge upset that was the 2008 Grand Final. Geelong were massive favourites going into the game, as they had won 23 out of the 24 games they'd played so far that year. And whilst Hawthorn had shown to be in good form during the final series, they still didn't compare to the seemingly unbeatable Cats. The game was very close in the first half, and for most of the third quarter, but then suddenly Hawthorn broke away late in the quarter due to some acts of individual brilliance by Stewie Dew. The Hawks were then able to consolidate the lead from there and win by 26 points. The full-time score read Geelong 11-23-89 to Hawthorn 18-7-115.
Buddy runs him down. Hawthorn, the champions. The long wait for Crawford over.
The biggest upset in 2009 was in round 20 when St Kilda lost to Essendon. Going into the game, St Kilda were on a 19-game winning streak and were therefore yet to lose a game all season. Essendon were 9th on the ladder with 8 wins, 1 draw and 10 losses. The final score was 16-14-110 to 16-12-108. Nick Rewalt had the chance to win the game for the Saints with a shot after the siren, but missed.
Siren sounds, and to win the game for the Saints, he's missed. Rewald has missed. Look at the Bomber fans.
The next biggest upset for the year was when St Kilda lost the following week to North Melbourne, who were 13th on the ladder. I chose their loss to Essendon as the bigger upset for the year, as it was more unexpected since St Kilda were undefeated up until that point. Before we get into the biggest upset for 2010, I'd like to give an honourable mention to the 2 times Melbourne and Collingwood went head-to-head in 2010. Melbourne were coming off the back of a wooden spoon in 2009, and as you probably already know, Collingwood were to be premiers in 2010. The first time they met in 2010, which was in round 2, Melbourne only lost by 1 point, and then the second time they met, in round 12, the match ended up being a draw. But since Melbourne never actually won either, the biggest upset for 2010 was again between Essendon and St Kilda, which happened in round 18. Going into the game, Essendon were 12th on the ladder on 6 and 11, compared to St Kilda who were 3rd on 13 and 4. The Bombers comfortably overpowered the Saints, with the full-time score being 16-12-108 to 11-9-75.
What a win this has been for the Bombers. One of the big upsets of the year so far. And so appropriately, Monfils might have the final say.
The biggest upset for the 2011 season was when Sydney beat Geelong in Geelong in round 23. Going into round 23, Geelong was 2nd on the ladder and Sydney was 7th. But the thing that made this the biggest upset for the year was that at the time, Geelong were on a 29-game winning streak at Cardinia Park, meaning the last time they lost playing in Geelong was in round 21 2007. To this day, this is still the longest streak by any club at any venue. The full-time score on that day was Geelong 12-14-86 to Sydney 15-9-99.
And what a moment for the Sydney Swans, who haven't won here for 12 years. They end the drought. And one of the greatest home streaks in Australian sport is over.
The biggest upset for 2012 was between Essendon and Melbourne in round 10. When looking at the ladder at the end of the 2012 season, this may not look like a huge upset, as Essendon ended up finishing 11th and Melbourne ended up finishing 16th. But going into round 10, Essendon was sitting 2nd on the ladder with 8 wins and 1 loss, and Melbourne were 18th, having not won a game since round 23 the previous year. Melbourne won by a goal, with the final score being 6-16-52 to 8-10-58.
Mark Neild is going to love this siren. He throws the headset down. The siren hasn't quite gone yet, but he's celebrating. Unbelievable scenes. Neild, players, fans, going absolutely chaotic here.
For the biggest upset for 2013, I couldn't put anything above the miracle on grass that was round 13 between Brisbane and Geelong. Geelong was second on the ladder and Brisbane were 15th. But not only was this a huge upset, but it was one of the most thrilling AFL games of all time. Biggest upset of 2014 was the Battle of the Bridge in round 1, GWS versus Sydney. Since the Giants only joined the league in 2012, they were riding off the back of 2 consecutive wooden spoons. Sydney, on the other hand, in those 2 years, had won a premiership in the first and made a prelim in the second. It was also Lance Franklin's first game for the club, so needless to say, they were the clear favourites. The game saw the Giants win by a comfortable 32 points after a brilliant last quarter where they pulled away from the Swans. The game also marked the first time they beat their crosstown rivals.
Standing youngsters in this competition. Remember his name.
The biggest upset in 2015 again involves GWS, as I've gone for round 6 when they first beat the Hawks. Whilst going into the game, both teams were on 3 wins and 2 losses. This was still a huge upset, as Hawthorn were coming off back-to-back premierships, and GWS, whilst not finishing bottom of the ladder for a third year in a row in 2014, still finished 16th. The final score read GWS 16-12, 108 to Hawthorn 14-14, 98.
And the siren sounds. The Giants have captured the premiers at home, and they've won in what could be their finest moment.
For 2016, I decided that the biggest upset was the Western Bulldogs' entire final series. The Bulldogs finished 7th in the home and away season and were riddled with injuries. Most importantly, their captain, Bob Murphy, who had been injured almost the whole season. The Bulldogs first managed to beat West Coast in an away elimination final, which in itself was a huge upset. They then beat Hawthorn in the semi-final, and in doing so stopped them from their dreams of winning a 4th consecutive premiership. So by then, the Bulldogs had knocked out both of the previous year's grand finalists. They then went on to win the prelim against GWS by 6 points, making the grand final for the first time since 1961, and then as the massive underdogs beat Sydney in the grand final, winning their first premiership since 1954. Whilst not just one game, the entire 2016 final series was easily the biggest upset of the year, as it was that unexpected for Bulldogs supporters and the broader AFL community. The biggest upset for 2017 was in round 14 between Adelaide and Hawthorn at the Adelaide Oval. Heading into the game, Adelaide was top of the ladder, whereas Hawthorn was sitting at 17th. Hawthorn did, however, prove later in the season that it wasn't a bottom 2 side, ultimately having several good wins late in the season and finishing 12th, whereas Adelaide, of course, finished top and lost the grand final to Richmond. On the night, however, it was safe to say no one saw a Hawthorn win coming. After trailing by 3 goals at half-time, from then on Hawthorn had the momentum for pretty much the rest of the match and slowly outworked the Crows to win by 14 points. The full-time score read Adelaide 12-10-82 to Hawthorn 14-12-96.
Hodgie wants to coach. There's a role there for him. On a Thursday night in Adelaide, the Hawks upset the Crows. 17 beats top. It's Hawthorn by 14.
For 2018, I was Collingwood beating Richmond in the prelim. As for the 2018 prelim, that was a big upset as well because of how unstoppable Richmond had been throughout the whole 2018 season. They finished the season top of the ladder by 2 games and were the reigning premiers. And to add to all of that, they were on a 22-game winning streak at the MCG, meaning the last time they lost a game there was in round 13 the year before. Collingwood managed to win 15-7-97 to 8-10-58, knocking the Tigers out for season 2018 and making their way into the grand final.
Collingwood will go into the 2018 grand final, a famous victory on the back of this man here.
The biggest upset in 2019 was in round 23 between West Coast and Hawthorn. Going into the game, West Coast were fighting to remain in the top 4 as they were 3rd on the ladder. Not to mention they had the home ground advantage and were the reigning premiers. Hawthorn were 9th on the ladder at the time and were just hoping to make it into the finals. The final margin was 38 points Hawthorn's way, as the full-time score was West Coast 9-13-67 to Hawthorn 16-9-105. Although despite Hawthorn's victory on the night, they still did not make it into the finals, as the Western Bulldogs beat Adelaide the following day to stop Hawthorn from making it.
Liam Ryan out, takes the shot himself and misses. And there's the siren.
The biggest upset in 2020 was in round 2 between Gold Coast and West Coast. Round 2 was the first round back after the season was temporarily cancelled due to lockdowns. Gold Coast were coming off the back of a wooden spoon in 2019, and West Coast were premiers 2 years prior and finalists the previous year. Gold Coast also were on a 19-game losing streak, having not won a game since round 4 2019. Gold Coast broke their streak in stunning fashion, as they ended up winning 14-6-90 to 6-10-46, almost doubling West Coast's full-time score.
And their first victory in 427 days is going to live long in the memory for the Gold Coast Suns. Their 200th game as a club is a ripper. Matt Rowell, Noah Anderson are winners for the first time.
The biggest upset in 2021 was on Queen's birthday between Melbourne and Collingwood in round 13. Melbourne had only lost one game all year up to that point and was sitting on top of the ladder. Collingwood, on the other hand, was 16th and looking to get their 4th win for the year. The match was played at the SCG rather than the MCG due to brief lockdowns in Melbourne. It was also Nathan Buckley's last game coaching Collingwood. This clearly inspired the Pies to really give it their all. The full-time score read Melbourne 9-9-63 to Collingwood 11-14-80.
A little grin from Bucks. It's a famous win. A black and white fairy tale. A win against the ladder leader.
The biggest upset in 2022 was round 18 between North Melbourne and Richmond. North Melbourne were bottom of the ladder on a 14-game losing streak and looking set to win their second wooden spoon in a row. Richmond were 8th and looking to gain some momentum to solidify their spot in the 8. In the end, North won by 4 points, with the full-time score reading 14-8-92 to 11-22-88. A missed opportunity for Richmond, especially due to their inaccuracy.
Lee Adams at the helm for the first time in a week. Well, they've changed coaches. North Melbourne did it the hard way, but they did it.
For 2023, I was considering choosing Hawthorn's win over Collingwood, but in the end I went for West Coast beating the Bulldogs, as while 16th beating 1st is a bigger gap than 18th beating 8th, Hawthorn were looking in better form and getting a few wins by the time they faced Collingwood. It would be untrue to suggest that West Coast hadn't been in a bit better form before the game, as in round 20 they beat North Melbourne by 5 points, which was their first win since round 2. They also then lost to Essendon by only 1 point at Marvel Stadium 2 weeks prior to the Bulldogs game. Although the week before the Bulldogs game, they had lost the Derby to Fremantle by 101 points, so it was safe to say no one saw this win coming. Also, to add to the Bulldogs-Eagles game being the bigger upset, the Bulldogs had the home ground advantage and a final spot was on the line for them. In case you forgot, West Coast got up by 7 points as the full-time score read 12-13-85 to 14-8-92.
The joy of victory is there for this West Coast Eagles, this proud club. So soak it in.
So that's it for this video, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you disagree with any of my decisions, please let me know down in the comments. I'm happy to discuss it with anyone. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I personally just can't wait for the footy season to start again. So a lot more content on the way soon. So yeah, anyway, have a good one, guys. See you next time.